Welcome to Crosswinds Church. We're so glad you're joining us today online. We're going to start our time together by singing, celebrating this faithful God we serve who's mighty. So sing this out. Sing just one word. Here we go. Just one word. You calm the storm that surrounds me. Just one word. The darkness has to retreat. Just one touch, I feel the presence of heaven. Just one touch, my eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe that there's nothing that God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that a God can't do. Just one word, you heal what's broken inside me. Just one word, and you revive every dream. Yes, you do. Just one touch, I feel the power of heaven. Just one touch, my eyes are open to see. My heart can't help but believe that there's nothing that God can't do. It's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that a God can't do. There's nothing that a God can't do. There's not a prison wall He can't break through. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that a God can't do. 'Cause I believe you're doing greater things, oh God. Sing, I will believe. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise. Let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise. Let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise. Let all agree. There's no power like His power. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a prison wall He can't break through. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Oh.
Hey everyone, we're back for another online service at Crosswinds Church. I want to give a special welcome to those of you who may be joining us more recently. Maybe you came here at Christmas or found us another way. We want to just say that we're glad you're here. We're glad that we can be a part of your spiritual journey and that you can be a part of this community, even though it looks a little different these days. Speaking of community, one of the ways that we nurture community is being together. And being together is an extra challenge in this time, but I'm seeing that you're finding ways to do that, whether it's having come here for our Christmas event, whether it's having your small group meet here, or whether it's just meeting a friend for lunch in our outdoor area. I've seen you doing that, and I love it. We love having this campus open and available for you to have a safe outside space to be together. So one of the ways that we want to help foster that togetherness is by offering a night of prayer. So tonight, well, if you're watching this on Sunday, January 24th, tonight we are having our first Sunday night prayer gathering. And we're just gonna meet around the fire pit, spread out, be led in a guided prayer, and then to open it up to just a time of prayer for our families, our church, our community, and our country. So we'd love to have you there. If you have any questions, you can reach out to one of our pastors, Carol Taylor, through her email. Another way to maintain that togetherness is through our small groups. Small groups are one of the most important ways here at Crosswinds where you can connect to other people, you can find that encouragement and support when you need it, and you can just dialogue about what God's doing in your life and how the things that we talk about here can be applied to your life in a very real way. So if you're looking to get connected through a small group, and we have a meeting online and in person, so whatever meets your needs, I want to invite you to reach out to us at our group's email, groups@crosswindschurch.org. We have a pastor who is dedicated to helping you find your best fit in a small group. So let us come alongside you and enrich your experience of community here. And you know, speaking of, if you are interested or maybe you have this idea of possibly wanting to be a leader of a small group, you know, we have a training coming up on February 7th. So it's a great time to jump in because you will be well supported, well trained. So find out more about that again by emailing us at groups@crosswindschurch.org. Well, as always, we want to thank you for how you support and enrich this community through your giving. There's 3 ways that you can do that, so we want to just encourage you to find what works best for you as you become a part of this community in that way. Well, as you probably know, we're continuing in our series about goodness. And today we're talking more specifically about how our words help us do gooder. So we went around and asked some people a little something about words. Take a look.
Normally we would go up to people and ask them this question, but obviously we can't. So I decided to use my favorite method. Check it out. Fried zucchini. Do you like fried zucchini? Ooh, jalapeno poppers. Can you tell me what your most favorite word is?
Oh gosh, I literally had one of these the other day. I was thinking about this. A bubble.
Bubble?
Bubble.
That's so funny. And then what about the word that you hate the most?
Hate the most?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, oh my gosh.
My most favorite word?
Yeah.
Money.
Money.
My favorite word ever?
Yes.
Family.
Family, I love it. Okay, now what's your least favorite word?
Dead.
Dead. Okay. Dead.
Never thought of that question.
Okay, how about your least favorite word?
Least favorite word? I haven't thought of that either.
Really? Nothing on the top of your head?
No,
Nothing.
nothing.
Okay, thank you. Nothing and nothing. Okay. Okay, now what's your least favorite word?
Moist. Which one? Between the two.
The first one you mentioned.
Baconetta fries?
Sure.
Okay.
The word you don't like.
Probably moist.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
the second person that
A lot of
said
people
moist.
hate that one.
Yeah.
One of them.
Moist, okay. Moist. Okay, what about your most favorite word?
Permanente.
Permanente.
Yeah.
Oh, Espanol.
Yeah.
Okay, permanente, because it's permanent. The one you love the most.
I like pizza, so pizza.
Pizza,
Yeah,
that's a good
Yeah.
one. Pizza. Am I gonna hit the curb? Oh, I hit the curb.
Word?
Yes, word.
Word?
Word.
Word? As a cashier?
Permanente. It's like Kaiser. Permanente. Are you there? Hello? Do you have one? Carrots? Carrots. 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 You like carrots? He likes carrots. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, sure.
Well, by now, 10 months into this coronavirus outbreak affecting our lives, we are all very familiar with quarantine, right? This is a new reality for us. It's not just something we've seen in a movie. We are getting used to life under quarantine. But what you might not know is that zoos have been doing quarantines for a long time. And about 3 or 4 months ago, the Lincolnshire Wildlife Park in England decided to adopt 5 new African gray parrots. Apparently, when a zoo first adopts animals, they quarantine them to make sure that everything's okay before they put them in with the rest of the animals. And after a little while, that seemed to be true of these parrots. And so they moved into an exhibit that was out with the public. And it was then that they noticed something that quickly became a problem. The parrots started swearing at park guests. They weren't sure how it happened, but after the 5 parrots had been quarantined together, they came out with quite the blue vocabulary. The CEO explained to the British News, for the last 25 years, we've always taken in parrots that have sometimes had a bit of blue language, and we've really gotten used to that. But just by coincidence, we took in 5 in the same week, and because they were all quarantined together, it meant that one room was just full of swearing birds. The more they swear, the more you usually laugh, which then triggers them to swear again. But when you get 4 or 5 together that have learned the swearing and the laughing, so when one swears, one laughs, before you know it, it just got to be like an old working men's club scenario where they all are just swearing and laughing. So I guess the point is, watch what you say during quarantine. Your words might actually follow you back out into the normal world. Not really. I bring that story up because I wonder if it doesn't pretty accurately reflect something that we all know to be true, that the words we choose affect everyone around us, and that the words don't stop with us. They get taken to the next person, and the next person, and the next. And because of that, our words, the ones we choose, are very important. Real quick, when I say that, I don't mean swears. I am probably the wrong guy to talk about what's an obscenity and what's not. Frankly, it seems to me that a lot of the official swear words that we choose to be offended by are just words that we allow to let offend us. No, I think the important words that get parroted from one person to another are often perfectly acceptable in whatever group you might use them, but they still have the capacity to do great harm. And like with the parrots, they create a climate or a culture of bad words being spoken that tear down, push away, destroy, leave somebody who heard them insecure. Like with the parrots, this stuff can become contagious. I was thinking about this. We see these kind of not so good words spoken in marriages, where a husband tells his wife that she's a nag, and then she says back that he's lazy. Or a parent tells a kid that they can't see them amounting to much, and a kid says back to a parent they want nothing to do with them. We see it among friends and business partners, and unfortunately, we see it these days with our elected officials. Words that get spoken to someone that causes them to say some not so good words, which causes others to add their not so good words, and pretty soon, the culture you've created in your family, your business, your friendship circle, your country, not so good, and you have to shut down the zoo. Certain not so good words are harmful. They get spoken and the damage is done, and there is a power to words. And I think that you already know that. You know there's a power, and you know to choose your words wisely, to be cautious. So today, I'm not going to spend time trying to convince you to do that. I'm assuming you've learned that lesson in life. But what I have found is that often, while we know what words are harmful, we don't know what words are helpful. Let me say that again. Most people I know have no problem knowing what words to not say, but they struggle with coming up with good words that are helpful. Sure, we have some working knowledge, some basics. I love you. Okay, pretty smart to say that on Valentine's Day. Or, you mean a lot to me. Probably a good idea for you to say, good job to your kids or your employees once in a while. But aside from that, sometimes some of us think the best that we can do is not screw up our words. And that's not true. If words can destroy, they can build up. But to do that, you got to know the right good words to say. And let me tell you, I love you isn't enough. A few years ago, an American dentist got on a plane and was excited to do some sightseeing in Granada, a province in Spain, and it had been 2 years without a vacation, and so he was thrilled to finally go somewhere that he'd been wanting to go for a while, Granada, Spain. 9 hours later, he landed 4,000 miles from his intended destination. He landed in Grenada, the island in the Caribbean. He swore that he made it absolutely clear to the booking agent where he had wanted to go. He even had a layover in Lisbon, Spain, and then flew to Grenada from there. And so he sued the airline for $34,000. The judge refused to throw out the lawsuit, and the judge actually said, this case proves the truth of Mark Twain saying, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. I like that. There is a difference between a right word and an almost right word. And we could say that's true with good words as well, right? There's a difference between a good word and an almost good word. And I would say that if words are powerful, then it is important for you and I to learn the difference between almost good or decent and really good words. And today, I want to show you a story in the Bible that gives us 3 types of really good words that we can be intentional about saying that will bring goodness into the lives of our friends and our family and others who orbit around us and this country that needs some really good words right now. What would it be to be people who can bring goodness into someone's life, even just by our words? So, if you're following along in a Bible or a Bible app on your phone, we're going to find this story in 2 Samuel 9. Of course, we'll put the passages up on the screen with me, but if you are home watching this, you probably have a Bible somewhere. Maybe grab it and follow along. It might make this whole thing way more interactive. 2 Samuel 9 is where we'll be. And real quick as you get there, let me just say I am greatly indebted to a pastor out of South Carolina for what I'm going to show you, a pastor named Richard Easel. I've read this story before, never really noticed the power of words in this story or the types of words I'm going to show you till I saw what Richard Easel wrote about it. Now, in 2 Samuel 9, we're going to find a story about David. And here's what you need to know as we dive into this. For years, David had been hunted by the power-crazy King Saul. Saul had been trying to keep him, or I should say kill him, to keep David from becoming king, taking his place. And Saul is now dead at the part that we're going to read, and David has been crowned the king over all of Israel. But here's what you've got to know as background for what we're about to read. It was common practice in those days to exterminate everyone who had been a part of the family of the previous king. Did you catch that? In the ancient Mideast, when somebody became king, what they would typically do is kill the family of the previous king. See, king was not an elected position. You became king either because your dad was king and you were next in line, no need to kill anyone then, although people still did. They'd sometimes kill their brothers if they thought they were a threat. But you became king because you were next in line to your dad, the king, or because you fought the king and you won leadership over your country. And I just alluded to this. The reason in the region surrounding Israel that new kings would kill the families of old kings, it was so that their relatives, the descendants of the old king, wouldn't come back and try to kill them and seek the throne. As long as there's one relative, there's a threat to the new king. So, David is the new king. He's not related to Saul. You would think that this is what he's going to do. But as 2 Samuel 9 begins, it begins with this, verse 1. David asked, "Is there still anyone left of the house of Saul to whom I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" David does the opposite of what any other king would do. Others would ask, is there anyone remaining from Saul's family that we need to exterminate? Not David. And he gives a reason, for Jonathan's sake. See, David had been best friends with one of Saul's sons, Jonathan, like best friends. Now, Jonathan had died in a battle against the Philistines. He's long gone by now. And David did not have to do this, show kindness to Saul's family. Saul had put him through hell, trying to kill him for years. But David is a good guy. And he reflects on his friend Jonathan who's passed, and he wants to do the opposite of what is expected. Now, if you know the story of David, the long story, you know there will come a time where David does some not so good things, some terrible things. But at least right here, he is operating out of goodness. Verse 2 says, "Now, there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and he was summoned to David. And the king, David, said to him, 'Are you Ziba?' And he said, 'At your service.' And the king said, 'Is there anyone remaining of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?' And Ziba said to the king, 'There remains a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in both feet.' The servant tells David, 'Actually, yes, Saul has a grandson, and he is crippled.'" By the way, this is not the first we've heard of this grandson in the Bible. He gets introduced 5 chapters earlier in chapter 4, tells us that when he was 5 years old, his nurse heard of some raids that were going on in the kingdom, and so she picked him up, and she fled, and she fell down as she was running, and that is when this person lost the use of his legs. His name is Mephibosheth. All right, say that with me, Mephibosheth. I guarantee I will say that wrong at some point during the rest of this message, and we will not stop taping. We'll just keep going. Mephibosheth. This is a mouthful. Mephibosheth. He has been living in obscurity and poverty in kind of a remote, barren corner of the kingdom because nobody remembers the crippled person Mephibosheth. But David summons him. And so the servants of the king, they go and they get him and they bring him to the palace. Now, imagine for a second Secret Service showing up at your door. And you are part of the previous regime. And they say to you, "We need you to come with us." And you can't do anything because you're unable to walk. And so you say, "Where are we going?" And they say, "To see the king." Mephibosheth has got to be freaking out. He has got to be expecting the worst. I'm going to be killed because Saul was my grandfather. All right, take a look at what happens in verse 6. It says, "Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and did obeisance. David said, 'Mephibosheth.' He answered, 'I am your servant.' David said, 'Don't be afraid. I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore you to all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you yourself shall eat at my table always." Okay, verse 8. "He did obeisance, and he said, 'What is your servant that you should look upon a dead dog such as I?'" This is a big deal to him. Mephibosheth calls himself a dead dog, the nastiest, foulest thing that he can think of. For a Jewish person, this was a very self-deprecating statement. A dog was like the most repulsive animal imaginable. And on top of that, anything dead was vile and unclean. He thought of himself as a pile of human garbage. I just ask you to think for a second, right? A lifetime of name calling probably flooded over him as he was carried into this throne room. All the people who said that he wouldn't amount to anything, that he was worthless. But David is using words that are very different from what he's experienced. Verse 9. It says, "Then the king summoned Saul's servant Ziba, and he said to him, 'I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family.'" Verse 10, "You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops so that your master's grandson may be provided for. Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Verse 11, then Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do." And so Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. That's it. That's the story. Now, let me show you the 3 types of really good words that David uses that you and I can be using that have the power to build people up and change their lives. And the first type we see back in verse 7. David says to Mephibosheth, I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore you to all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul. Okay, right there, David reminds him and everyone listening that Mephibosheth is a son and a grandson of royalty. Yes, hidden away in the corner of the country as a cripple, his family having been ashamed of him, forgetting that he exists. He may think of himself as a dead dog, but he is not. He is the son and grandson of royalty, and he deserves to be treated with dignity. It had probably been a long time since anybody had called Mephibosheth a son. And when we talk about words that are good, what we see right away in this story, and the very first thing David says, are words that bring dignity. Back in the mid to late 19th century, there was a Russian pastor named John of Kronstadt. He was a priest, and this was a time in a place of just dirty marketplaces. At that time, Russia was in real moral decline. The streets were dangerous, lots of poverty and depravity. Crime was out of control. Alcoholism was like rampant. Prostitutes crowded the corners. Thieves were in the alleys. There was no safe place. So most people who weren't part of that world did not go out into it. Well, many of the clergy, who at that time lived a life of privilege and status, they tried to stay away from all that stuff, but not Father John. Every day, he'd put on his robe, and he would go down into the meanest part of the city, and he would walk among the addicts and the predators and the prostitutes and the thieves and the orphans and the widows. And he would find the most broken man or woman he could track down, lying in a gutter, standing on a street corner. And he would put their chin in his hand and lift their face so they were looking directly in his eyes. And he would say, this, meaning this way of life, this means of survival, this condition I find you in, this is beneath your dignity. You were created to house the glory of the living God. This is beneath your dignity. You were created to house the glory of God. During his time, he became known as the pastor of all Russia. Everywhere he went, life change happened. When we talk about dignity, what we mean is that someone is worthy of respect. And that comes from two sources, right? It's I respect you, but it's also you respect you. And sometimes for a person to have dignity themselves, respect for themselves, they need to be treated with dignity by you. Have words of dignity spoken into them by you. When David calls Mephibosheth a son again, or a grandson of the king, this outcast, he's no longer an outcast. He is a respected descendant of royalty. And so, the first kind of words that we see David speak that are good words are words of dignity, words that remind people of how worthy of respect they are. All right, let me show you the second kind of words. Again, in verse 7, it says, I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. By the way, did you see a trend in this passage as we read it? 4 times the passage points out that Mephibosheth will be eating at David's table forever, always. Twice, David himself is saying, this is how it's going to be. This guy is going to eat at my table. Now, remember, Mephibosheth had a life of rejection. He lived in obscurity and in fear. He felt lost and forgotten, unimportant. And so when David says, you can eat at my table, these are incredibly important, good words. Especially, you will always eat at my table. Because what David was saying was, Mephibosheth, you will have a place for the rest of your life. You ever see contests where somebody wins a lifetime supply of something? I always wonder what's that like. Is there anything that if you had a lifetime supply of it, you wouldn't get sick of it? I found a subreddit dedicated to this. One person wrote this: I won a lifetime supply of Mars bars when I was 15. I get a box of 30 delivered every month. For the first 6 months, it was awesome. Never had to buy chocolate, had plenty to share with my friends. After a year, it was hard to even give them away as everybody was sick of Mars bars. Now, every 3 months or so, I deliver 75 or so to my local food bank. I'm currently living in Thailand. I dread to think how many Mars bars I'm going to go home to. Another person, they wrote this: my mom and dad bought a water softener about 22 years ago. With it came a lifetime supply of bar soap. The company gave it to them all at once. It was a pallet of bar soap. Thousands of bars of soap. They still have a bunch of it. The soap is Lanachine brand. My favorite, this person said, in 1974, my dad was a detective in the Vice Squad. One night, they busted a few guys driving a truck that had many kilos of cocaine hidden amongst a shipment of razors. After the trial, all the guys in the unit got to take home as much as they want. Not cocaine, razors. He writes, I was born 8 years later, and neither he nor I have ever bought razors since. If someone sees me shaving, they might ask where I got that 1970s razor, so I tell them the 1970s. I don't think there's anything I want a lifetime supply of, but I will say that if I was invited to eat at the King's table and that food for the rest of my life, King's table food, I don't think I'd ever get sick of that. But this is not just about the food. This is David saying right here, you, Mephibosheth, are accepted here. You will always have a place here in the palace at my table. And I think words of acceptance are the kinds of specific words that we need to speak to each other. To say to someone, not just, I love you, but if I could, I would choose to hang out with you. I like you so much, I want more of you in my life. You belong here with me, not to me, but with me. Like, you will always have a place of belonging with me, a place where you belong. And if you want to speak life into someone that changes their life, try letting them know that they belong. You know how many people feel like they don't belong anywhere? Those are good words. All right, let me show you the third kind of words. Once more, back to verse 7. Don't be afraid, David said, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. Here's the part I want you to see. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul. David says, I am restoring to you all that land. Now, to us, that sounds like, oh, he gave him wealth or at least an income. Mephibosheth could make money off of this land, hire people to farm it, and it is that. But back then, if you owned land, and I say owned land like it was a tiny lot on the edge of town, this is land that used to belong to the king. I mean, this is the best land, right? I mean, the king had good land. If you owned land back then, that was part of your identity. And that was a position that you held. I'm a landowner. And what David does is he speaks this third type of words that restore Mephibosheth, restore his identity and position. Most people agree that the Sistine Chapel is one of the true must-sees in the world of art. After spending 4 years painting it, Michelangelo finished his masterpiece on the ceiling in 1512, and then the chapel went into daily use. Now, in those days, the only light source came from candles. And as candles burned every year, the soot began to rise to the ceiling, covering up these paintings. So after 400 years of soot and grime and dust collecting on the ceiling, the original art had to be restored. A team of restorative artists worked on the Sistine Chapel from 1984 to 1999 until the monochrome colors were finally restored to their original beauty. And actually, before that, many in the art community thought that Michelangelo was definitely a genius at composition, but they thought his coloration was kind of mediocre. It's too dark, it's monochromatic, it was blah. And yet, when they restored those frescoes to their original state, everybody could see the beautiful, fresh, even vivid colors. When the maker's true brilliance and goodness were revealed, people, they had to change their assumptions about Michelangelo. Well, here's the thing. You are God's masterpiece. You probably heard that before. And so is everyone else that you come across. But for a lot of people, over the years, the soot and the grime and the dust of everyday life have obscured God's intention for that person. You know what else obscures his masterpiece? The negative words that get thrust on someone. Because everybody hears a lot of them, words that harm. And maybe there are times where we seem blah and mediocre and maybe even dark and muted. But what God does in us through Jesus is he begins the work of restoration, right? But part of how he does it is with a team of restorers. And you and I are meant to be on that team for other people. And we help restore them through our words. We show people their real identity and their position. Crosswinds, you have someone in your life right now who needs more than "I love you." More than, "Hey, great job." You don't have to be eloquent. You don't have to have a vocabulary that's particularly deep and use big words. You don't have to make the words perfect and timeless. You just have to speak words that bring dignity, that remind people they're respect-worthy. You've got to speak words of acceptance, like, "You belong here with me. You will always have a place." And words that restore, helping people see their real identity that may have gotten covered up by all the negative in this world. I want to challenge you to do this with someone in your life this week. One of those 3 types of words. And watch the brilliant colors that God had underneath all along start to come out.
Okay, so my best friend, we have been best friends since 7th grade, 13 years old. I guess I lost who I was, but when I finally decided to break free and decide that enough is enough, I'm gonna go back to who I was, because I realized I was missing something. I was missing myself, to be honest. And she just told me, she's like, "I'm getting my best friend back." At that moment, it was just like what I needed to hear.
One of the most impactful words of encouragement I received came at a time when I was trying to decide if I was fit to be a pastor or not, actually. Crosswinds had just invited me to be a part of the team, and I called up my friend Phil, who is also a pastor, and I asked, "Dude, am I capable of doing this? Am I equipped to do this?" And I just remember Phil's encouragement being so wise. He said to me, "Daniel, none of us are." And really, it's not so much about that. More so, it's about God making us capable, God stepping in and being present, and God being the one who makes impact on lives that we come in touch with. And I just remember the relief that came with that and the freedom that came with that.
Some of the most encouraging words I've heard lately are from my kindergarten students. This year I'm teaching kindergarten on Zoom, which was quite challenging, but lots of fun. And at the end of our day, I'll say things like, "Oh, we have to go. I have to end the meeting." And they'll say, "No, Mrs. Cruz, don't end the meeting. We want to stay on longer. We want to learn more. You're the best teacher in the whole wide world. Don't end the meeting." And so it's really encouraging to hear those words, and also makes it lots of fun.
I remember back in college struggling with deciding whether I should pursue business or if I was being called into some kind of vocational ministry. And my pastor at the time encouraged me by saying, "You are probably called to both, and that's okay. That's still a high calling that honors God." And that's something I've carried with me ever since.
One of the most encouraging things anyone's ever told me is that Jesus would be just as pleased with me, just as satisfied, and just as in love with me, even if all I did for the rest of my life were simply sit at his feet. Not because I myself am worthy, but because he looks at me in all simplicity, just sitting crisscross applesauce at his feet, and he says, "I love you. You were enough for me."
leave. Your love sustaining me. Before I even knew what love was, you brought me here to rest and given me space to breathe. So I'll stand still until it sinks in. And I will lean back in the loving arms of a beautiful Father. Breathe deep and know that He's good. He's a love like no other. Oh, you will never leave. Your love sustaining me. Before I even knew what love was. Oh, you brought me here, and you brought me here to rest. And you've given me space to breathe. So I'll stand still until it sinks in. I will lean back. I will lean back in the loving arms of a beautiful Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. I will breathe deep and know that He is good. He's a love like no other. Oh, I will lean back in the loving arms of a beautiful Father. Oh, I will breathe deep and know that He is good. He's a love like no other. loving arms of a beautiful Father. Breathe deep and know that He is good. He's a love like no other. God, I just feel like you are consistently bringing us to a place where just in the middle of really hectic, busy times, in the middle of seasons that kind of misplace us, that shake us a little bit, God, that we're learning how to rest, to pause and look at our lives and see you, God. See your Spirit moving through us, forming us, reshaping us, God. Until we're doing what you do, and we're speaking like you speak, and we're responding to things like you respond to them, God. Lord, I want to be the kind of person who can see that, who can pick it out, who can witness it, identify it as your Spirit moving in me, your Spirit doing something incredible inside me, Lord. And it all starts with me taking that space to breathe, to pause, to rest, and know that you're good, and know that you're working, God. God, thank you so much, Lord. And everyone said, amen.